What's going on, guys? Your boy First Drew, aka First and Three Dots. Sorry it took me so long to put this together, but I wanted to do a response to the State of the Union address, and I finally got a chance to watch it all the way through, and I went back and I took certain parts and I broke it down, and as you can tell, I got a lot of notes, so just bear with me. I'm not gonna go through the platitudes or the use of human beings for political props or the cliches and stereotypes. I really just want to concentrate on the policies. So let's go through a couple things, and hopefully this won't take too long. I'll wrap up real quick. Let's talk about the economy. Trump says, I'll quote him now, he said, "It's the best in our history, the best in the world." When you look at different eras throughout our history, that's just empirically not true. From the years of 1945 to 1973, many economists refer to that era as the golden age of expansion or the golden age of economics. During that time period, America basically had it. That was the strongest growth period in our history. There was financial stability for middle class families. Wages were keeping up with inflation, the cost of living. Unions were strong. Workers had protection. There was financial regulations, part of the New Deal apparatus, the Glass-Steagall Act, that were basically separated commercial and investment banks, so an investment bank can't come and take your deposit and go gamble with it. So there was literally no crashes, anything substantial for that time frame. At that time, CEOs made about 20% of what their employees make. Now they make roughly about 400 times of what their employees make. Top marginal tax rates on multinational corporations and top earners was higher. It fluctuated between 70% and 91%. That doesn't mean that the government takes 91% of your gross income. That means over a certain amount. So, for example, under Eisenhower, it peaked at 91% over top earners over $400,000, and I think that will be equivalent of like $2 million up to date. So that means anything above that will be taxed at that rate. So just want to clarify that. Overall, Middle America did really, really good. There was a huge amount of manufacturing jobs during that time period. We were untouchable when it came to manufacturing. Today's economy is truly just a house of cards. All the signs are there. We have student loan debt crisis and a number of other things. Some of the talking points that Trump brought up was the job numbers and the stock market. So let's talk about the jobs numbers right quick. So back in November 2017, Trump had the headline was that Trump's administration had created 227,612 jobs, and unemployment was fluctuating between 3.9 and 4.1%. Now, on the surface, that sounds good, okay, but the devil's in the details, and the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, also reported in the same report that was the headline for Fox and CNN and so on and so forth. It also said that there was 72.7 million what they call breadwinner jobs in the United States. Now, the significant thing about that number is that that's the same number that was reported back in December of 2007. It's also the same number that was reported back in January of 2000. So almost 20 years has went by, and the United States has not created one sustainable job. Nothing that we can point fingers at. The jobs that are being created now are replacing higher wage jobs, meaning they're shit jobs where people need 2 and 3 of them just to keep up with the cost of living. So, and another statistic from the BLS also reported that between 2005 and 2015, 94% of all jobs that were created in the United States were either part-time or temporary. Okay, and I talk a little bit more about that in my tax reform video. You might want to check that out. Also, Trump's first year, there was 93,000 jobs outsourced. That's the Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor Statistics. That's even worse than Obama's last year. Obama's last year in office was 87,500. So the whole thing about the job creation is that you have to look at the trend and the quality of the positions. That's what matters. And the stock market, let's talk about the stock market. That's not a true indicator of how average Americans are doing. Okay, here's a statistic for you. 83% of all stocks that are owned in the United States are owned by about 10% of the population. So it's an indicator that multinational corporations and the rich folk are doing good. It's not an indicator of how you and I are doing, and basically 90% of Americans who go to work every day. So also, when you look at the so-called boost of the economy, you have to remember something. Trump just did this tax bill, okay? The whole purpose of that tax bill, and I talk about this in my tax reform video, you might want to check it out. The whole purpose of this tax bill was essentially to turn billions of dollars over to corporations that don't need it, under this false pretense that they're going to use that money to create jobs and increase wages, invest more heavily than they have been in the past. But there's little to no evidence of that. 90% of that shit went to stock buybacks, and went to dividends, and went to other forms of capital interest, M&A deals that didn't quite pan out, stuff like that. It had nothing to do with jobs, but everything to do with profit. And that's what matters. So when you talk about this boost in the economy, this has nothing to do with capitalism, but it has everything to do with the government taking your tax dollars and giving it to corporations. That's where that boom came from. And it's unsustainable. Moving on, Trump also wanted to brag about the 3% GDP growth. He claims it's the best in the world. There again, that's something that's not true. China, this past quarter, their GDP growth was 6.5%. Chinese work, and that's actually lower than what they have been experiencing. Chinese workers' wages, adjusted to inflation, has quadrupled in the last 12 to 15 years. Average Americans' wages today have been stagnant for decades. They have not moved. And that's one thing that Trump didn't talk about. He didn't talk about wages or income inequality. And these are the things that bother us the most. These are the things that really, really need to be addressed. You can have a million jobs, but if they don't pay shit, and if you can't keep up with the cost of living and you can't even survive, then what the hell's the point? And this notion that if you work a full-time job and you cannot keep up with the cost of living, that's
inconceivable.
Exactly. Also, Trump wanted to talk about the estate tax, and how it's framed is called the death tax, and it's very misleading, because what it does, basically, the estate tax, it only applies to people with estates over $11 million. Okay, it used to be $7.5 million. So this notion that some guy who owns a little pizza joint down in Nebraska somewhere is scared that his little nest egg of $50,000 is going to disappear when he dies instead of going to his children, it's just not true. The way they present it is completely misleading. It only affects people with estates over $11 million. Okay? And I hate to use the quote, but Bill Maher said it best. Who's the best to tax besides dead rich people? Okay? So if you have an estate over $5 million, it won't affect you. If you have an estate over $1 million, it will not affect you. It only applies to people with estates over $11 million. So if you have a nice little nest egg somewhere for your children, by all means, it's not going to be touched. You're going to be fine. Something else he talked about was healthcare. Now, to be fair, he did appeal the individual mandate. The individual mandate was a huge problem when it came to Obamacare. That was the portion of the bill that was mostly disliked by Americans. They didn't think it was a good idea or they felt like it was unconstitutional to be penalized if you didn't buy health insurance from a private health insurance private health insurance company through the government. So yes, that is one of the things that that was completely discredited, or the American people did not like that. So, also, with Trump's executive orders that he's doing right now, 7 million people have been kicked off their health insurance. And he also bragged about the pre-existing conditions. Let's talk about that for a second. The pre-existing conditions was protected under Obamacare. That was one of the provisions of the Affordable Health Care Act. Right now, there's a lawsuit that the Republicans are standing up to to limit pre-existing conditions in certain states. I don't have the details right here in front of me, but it's definitely worth mentioning. It's definitely worth checking out. So this whole notion that he wants to protect pre-existing conditions, it's just not true. All right, so moving forward, he used some scare words. He talked about socialism in Venezuela and just wanted to scare the hell out of people that, if we do healthcare and education for people, we're just going to turn into a pile of shit. So let's be fair and honest about these things. I want to quote Trump right now. He said, "We were founded on liberty, freedom, and no government coercion." No government coercion. So never in our history. How about our Native American brothers and sisters? You trying to tell me the Indian Removal Act wasn't government coercion? Or how about our African American brothers and sisters? You trying to tell me the black codes, that wasn't government coercion? You're a clown, dude. Or how about women? They couldn't even vote. Where's the freedom and liberty with that? So let's talk about Venezuela for a moment. When you look at Hugo Chavez, essentially, and I'm going to break this down, but essentially his programs made progress in many different areas. The problem came when the government failed to use the opportunity to generate a sustainable economy. Okay, so there was no real initiative to move away from an oil-based economy. And the government didn't take advantage of the agribusiness or manufacturing. An economy they cannot survive by exporting raw materials alone. You have to kind of, build something sustainable. And plus the internal corruption that was going on, and I hate to say it, but at the time they just couldn't keep their hands out the cookie jar. So it did discredit Chavez. It did discredit the government of Venezuela, but it did not negate the fact that the programs that was being implemented did help the Venezuelan people. So that's one thing we need to talk about. The U.S. likes to use this as a scare tactic, basically to get people to be afraid or basically be against programs that would help them, like a single-payer healthcare system or publicly funded college. Let's be clear, though, the United States does not care about the economy or the people of Venezuela. They don't care about solving the internal problems, because if they did, they wouldn't have not put sanctions on them to begin with. Right now, the United States is exacerbating their problems, their economic problems. The real issue is that the U.S. wants to create a more significant problem so they can use this as a way to get the American people's approval to do regime change. And the whole purpose to do the regime change is for the U.S. to get their hands on their natural resources, which is oil. John Bolton was just on Fox Business a few days ago, and I want to quote him now. He said, "It'll make a difference for the United States economically if American oil companies produce the oil in Venezuela." That's his words, not mine. The United States in our history with oil, it goes way, way, way back. And I'll talk about it more in my foreign policy videos. I'm not going to go too much of it right. I'm not going to do too much of it right now, but I do want to point out a couple things. In 1945, the deputy to the Secretary of State, Dean Acheson, I'll quote him now, he sent a memorandum to Harry Truman. This is right after FDR had met with King Abdulaziz. It was the first time in our history that a Saudi king had met with a U.S. president. And they had a very interesting conversation. It was basically, how can we protect you and you protect us? And it was oil over weapons, basically. You give us oil, we'll give you weapons, and we all see the tragic end of that. But I'll quote him now. This is to Harry Truman. He said, "Oil resources constitute a stupendous source of strategic power and one of the greatest material prizes in world history. A concession covering this oil is nominally in American control." He goes on further to say that the oil must be protected for Western interest even if the use of force is necessary. So that's his words, not mine. I also want to quote something else. In 1958, Eisenhower sat down with the National Security Council, and there was a memorandum drawn up. Now, what I'm telling you guys, these documents are in the Library of Congress. You can go there, you can go to the National Archives, and you can pull these out and read them. There's declassified files, there are internal documents, internal records. The United States is a very free country. It's one of the most great things about us. And you have access to these documents just like I do and anybody else. But Eisenhower sat down with the National Security Council, and there was a memorandum drawn up. It was called the Campaign of Hatred. And Eisenhower had questions. He says there seems to be a campaign of hatred against the United States from the governments of these regions, particularly the Middle East. Why is this? We support freedom and promote democracy and so on and so forth. One of the council members responded and said, well, there's not a campaign of hatred from the governments of these regions, but more so from the people of these regions against the United States. Because the people of the regions view the United States as supporting the status quo and propping up harsh and brutal dictators, all in an effort to oppress the people of the region just to get their hands on Near East oil. John Foster Dulles, who was Secretary of State at the time, responded and said, well, it's kind of hard to counter that argument because it's true. Again, Their words, not mine. Guys, we gotta be fair and honest about these things. These little countries don't hate us because we got baseball and ice cream. Okay? We invade these countries, we strip their resources, we finance war if it's against their allies, we block diplomacy and democracy, we topple governments and replace them with dictators. Right now, the United States is currently upholding 73% of the world's dictators. Okay? So these things have to be addressed. We have to talk about these things. It's not about freedom and democracy. It's all about geopolitical power and control of natural resources. And speaking of corruption, we just talked about Chavez corruption within the system. Let's talk about another piece of corruption. I want to talk about corruption within capitalism. Okay. In 2007, we had the subprime mortgage crisis, and the Great Recession. What was going on was years and years of speculative, basically casino capitalism going on with these so-called investment banks on Wall Street. Now let's be clear, they're not really investment banks. They're big trading operations that over-leverage themselves and they get into all type of financial bullshit. But what they were doing with the subprime mortgage packages was that it was called a Hudson One, and Goldman Sachs was selling these mortgages to their unsuspecting clients. Then they knew that they were toxic. They knew that basically the securities were shit and they were going to fall apart. And at the same time they were selling them to their clients, Goldman Sachs was also betting against them to fail. That's called a short squeeze in financial terms. So let me ask you, let's apply that same principle. Would you say that capitalism failed, or would you say the corruption within capitalism failed? Obviously, the corruption. And how do we handle corruption? By holding people accountable. And how do you hold people accountable? With rules and regulations. Alright? So, in 2007, George Bush said, I'll quote him now, he said, "I have to suspend the rules of the free market in order to save the free market." You don't suspend the rules right at the hour that it's needed. The rules are there so these things won't happen. Okay? So that's where regulations come in, and that's where regulations is needed when it comes to this type of behavior. Alright? Moving on. Let's talk about abortion. He talked about abortion, and I know I know this is a very sensitive issue. I don't really talk about it too much. I don't do videos on it. I'm not going to do videos on it. But I want to quote Trump right now. President Trump said, "We need to be a culture that cherishes innocent life." Now think about that for a moment. We need to be a culture that cherishes innocent life. If the United States cares so much about innocent life, then why are we bombing 7 different countries right now? Mr. President, your first military action as president was the Yakla raid in Yemen. Your own intelligence told you that this was not the right thing to do. We do not need to go forward with this. You did it anyways. It was a failure, and you killed civilians, including an 8-year-old American girl. You've also increased drone strikes by 432%, according to the State Department's numbers and Department of Homeland Security. Obama was bad enough on the drones, and you increased them. You also did a multi-billion-dollar weapons deal with Saudi Arabia, in which, in return, we have been aiding in a genocide towards Yemen. And right now, the U.S. is also investigating Saudi Arabia because there is claims that they're taking the same weapons that they got from us and they're selling them to Al-Qaeda. And I haven't heard anyone even mention this. So, also, I have to say this, man. With the Democratic Party, despite their many, many flaws, there is not one Democrat in Congress that says we should kill babies. Okay? There's not one. There's not some doctor somewhere saying, "Oh, yes, how many babies should I kill today?" Like, it's just not true. Okay, Mr. Trump, you are purposely misleading people. You're feeding into this stale, vapid narrative. And with the New York law that you talked about, the whole thing with that law is it removes abortion from the criminal code, and it gives women the right to an abortion up to 24 weeks. Only after 24 weeks, if the mother will die or if the fetus is going to die, etc., etc. And for the record, only 1.3% of abortions happen after 21 weeks. Okay? So you should be ashamed of yourself, Mr. President. You're purposely misleading people, and you're falling into a narrative that is going to create more of a barbaric sense when it comes to this healthcare procedure. And for the record, like I said, abortion is a very sensitive issue. I try not to dive into it too much, and I don't believe the government should tell anybody what they should and should not do with their own body. So it's very sensitive, and I'm gonna leave that alone. So, in conclusion, I know I've talked your head off. I'm sorry. We're gonna wrap this up. But in conclusion, and I've heard this in many circles, many political circles, and I feel it to be true, but Trump is the Fox News president. There's no doubt about it. This dude sits in front of Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson and Fox and Friends and ingests it like it's Twinkies and Hamburger Helper. So, in the beginning, I understood the appeal of Trump. And I understand the American people were willing to roll the dice on this guy. Because, we're tired of politicians. I mean, it's not just you guys and everyone. We're tired of politicians. We're tired of no one really representing us. So, in the beginning, I understood the appeal of Trump. I completely understood it. But, we're 3 years in now, and we really have to question the future of not just our country, but just, humankind in general. And I know that both of the political parties are terrible. They both suck more ass than a French toilet. I totally understand that. And there is a reason why that both political parties basically just pander to get votes, because both of them essentially answer to the donors and not the voters. When you look at their voting records, they basically vote on the same shit. So, and there's some interesting history behind that. What has happened ever since the neoliberal period back in the 1970s, both parties have shifted to the right. So you have the Democrats who basically have shifted to the center, and the Republicans have just gone way off the spectrum. And that's actually recognized and acknowledged by leading conservative analysts. Norman Ornstein, for example, he's with the American Enterprise Institute. It's a right-wing think tank. He wrote a book, him and Thomas Mann wrote a book called It's Worse Than It Seems, or Worse Than It Looks, or something like that. And I want to quote him now. He talks about how the Democratic Party abandoned the working class. But he also said with the Republican Party, I'll quote him, he says, "The Republican Party has become an insurgent outlier, ideologically extreme, contemptuous of the inherited social and economic policy regime, scornful of compromise, unpersuaded by conventional understanding of facts, evidence, and science, and dismissive of the legitimacy of its political opposition." And I believe that to be true. And one example of this is climate change. There is a long history behind environmental issues and conservatism. For example, in 1962, Rachel Carson, a conservationist, wrote a book titled Silent Spring. She was able to lead a movement that was able to get regulations on the chemical industry and its use of pesticides. In 1970, Republican President Richard Nixon implemented the EPA. In 1987, Republican President Ronald Reagan signed into law the Montreal Protocol. Basically, the Montreal Protocol limited the amount of fluorocarbon emissions into the atmosphere. In 1990, Republican President George H.W. Bush signed into law the Global Change Research Act, which basically required a report from the National Science Committee to release its studies and findings every 4 years on global changes and how to combat them. In 2019, you have a Republican president and a Republican Congress that says science ain't even real, that it's some sort of hoax. Guys, this is night and day compared to how you're supposed to run a country and really talk about issues. Okay? This is night and day from traditional conservatism. And when you look at the people who are actually trying to fight for these things, people who are trying to get a living wage with the union, people who are trying to end the drug war, people who are trying to stop foreign intervention, people who are trying to basically reallocate our tax dollars towards healthcare and education and infrastructure, when you look at these people, the people who are trying to get money out of politics, trying to get the corruption out, people like Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ro Khanna, Tulsi Gabbard, these people are smeared all over TV. And there's a reason behind that. It's because both of those parties, they don't want that. They want to get rid of grandma's insurance. They want to privatize Social Security and Medicare. They want to get rid of all that shit. And it's not un-American to ask for these things. It's un-American not to ask for these things. I want to give you a quote from Dwight Eisenhower, a good Republican, and we'll end it there. Eisenhower said, "Should any political party attempt to abolish Social Security unemployment insurance and eliminate labor laws and farm programs, you would not hear of that party again in our political history. There is a tiny splinter group, of course, that believes you can do these things. Among them are a few Texas oil millionaires, an occasional politician or businessman from other areas. Their number is negligible and they are stupid." That's Dwight D. Eisenhower, a good Republican, November of 1954. I truly believe that the Republican Party of today can learn a lot from Eisenhower, and I truly believe that the Democratic Party of the day can learn a lot from FDR. Okay? I'm going to wrap up, man, and I know some people are going to watch this video and they're going to be like, "Oh man, this guy hates America, he hates the country, he's just some crazy liberal radical," or whatever the hell you want to call me. Let me tell you something. I love America, and I love my country. And this is why I have so much dissent. This is why I challenge these things. This is why I question these things. I have dissent towards my children all the time. Does that mean I hate them? No. It means I know they can do better. Just like I know my country can do better. So with that being said, that's my response to the State of the Union address. I've got the immigration video coming up. I've also got a foreign policy video coming up. So we've got a lot to discuss. We have a lot that troubles us. We have a lot of things to talk about. But I hope I broke this down for you enough. If you've got any questions or anything, you know where to find me. Leave some comments, talk to me. Let's engage. Regardless of how you feel about me or my position on any policies, I'm a principled person. And at the end of the day, I still want you to have health care. I still want your beautiful children to go to college and not worry about immense debt. I still want you to have financial security. I still want you to enjoy America. Okay? So, with that being said, excuse me, I say it all the time. I want you guys to be informed, be inspired, and be involved. And we'll definitely talk soon. I appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am officially running for President of the United States, and we are going to make our country great again.
Too bad you're crazy. Too bad you're loony as hell. So long, it could have been swell together. Too bad you're wacko. Wacko. How sad your marbles are gone. All gone. We could be dancing till dawn, but you're too weird for words. How did you get so strange? You were such a beautiful kid. Now you are so deranged. Was it Mom and Daddy? Something I did?
Too bad you're loco.
Too bad.
You should be locked in a cell.
How sad you're great, but hey, what the hell? You're crazy.
You're off the deep end.
Bon voyage.
Your life's a practical
Quel
joke.
dommage. I'd bail you out, but I'm broke. Your brain's completely fried.